Slide 110. Now that we have covered all of the geometric expressions of the Philosopher's Stone formula, we can use that knowledge to decode more comprehensive symbology using the art of metaphor. Slide 111. Our first stop will be the Norse cosmology from the Nordic tribes of Europe, made famous through its association with Vikings and neo-pagan ritualism. A mythology primarily passed down from oral tradition, it was later recorded in the Prose Edda, a collection of poems compiled in the 13th century. Together, these poems depict an image of 9 worlds surrounding a cosmic structure, Yggdrasil, the world tree. Slide 112. You can also see in this description that the gods of old religions were personified concepts, not supernatural beings, much the same way alchemists would represent their formulas symbolically, with some steps even taking the form of various animals or gods. It is the same use of metaphorical personification. Slide 113, Norse cosmology proceeds as a sort of story of the gods. It primarily revolves around Odin and his quest for knowledge, eventually leading to his self-crucifixion upon Yggdrasil, the world tree. An act he committed in order to gain more knowledge, Odin's defining feature. Slide 114. Knowledge specifically about the runes, which are the symbols presented before you. Curiously shaped sacred symbols said to hold magical powers, functioning as a sort of magical alphabet. However, this connection between Odin, Yggdrasil, and the runes hides something behind this fantastical symbolic imagery. Slide 115. Within the Prose Edda, Yggdrasil is described as a connecting structure that supports the 9 worlds of the cosmos. As we know from the description earlier, Norse cosmology and the various gods and creatures within it are personifications of natural forces, meaning that Yggdrasil itself is a symbolic representation for a natural force or structure. The image before you is an artist's depiction of Yggdrasil. Notice the various animals that surround and occupy its branches and roots. Each one of them is a symbolic representation for a natural force and one of the abstract steps of the Philosopher's Stone sequence. An eagle at the top, a serpentine dragon in its roots, 4 stags jumping in its branches, a serpent biting its own tail surrounding the tree itself, and if you can see it, a tiny squirrel nestled in the leaves. Right away we notice the Ouroboros, or snake biting its own tail, surrounding the tree, representing the unification of opposites in the abstract Philosopher's Stone formula. In the world of Norse cosmology, the unification of opposites takes the form of the world serpent, known as Jormungandr, a massive sea serpent that encircles the earth and bites its own tail, symbolizing the cyclical nature of existence to the Norse. Slide 116. Let's begin applying the abstract sequence to the symbology. The story of Norse cosmology acts as a sort of reoccurring cycle, much the same way our abstract formula functions. The climax of this cycle is referred to as Ragnarok, an apocalyptic event that destroys the current structure of the cosmos, symbolically being represented as Yggdrasil's destruction. However, the beginning of that story and our outer circle and prima materia takes the form of the first 2 humans that were created by the gods to inhabit the world of Yggdrasil. Aska and Embla. Slide 117. Created from driftwood, found floating in the ocean, they inhabited the realm of Midgard, the mortal plane that is surrounded by the Ouroboros or world serpent. Slide 118. That world serpent, known as Jormungandr, plays a vital role in the ending sequence of Norse cosmology, Ragnarok, symbolically signifying this as the unification of opposites, or beginning and end of the story. Slide 119. The Trinity takes on the form of the eagle, snake and squirrel, the often nameless eagle at the top, Nidhogger, the serpent-like dragon at its roots, and Ratatoska, the squirrel that ferries messages between them. Slide 120. Take the form of the 4 stags within the branches of Yggdrasil. These stags are sometimes described as 4 dwarfs. Slide 121. No matter the interpretation, they are meant to represent the 4 elements, or one of their manifestations, such as the four winds. Slide 122. The square of this process is Ragnarok itself, the culmination of Norse cosmology. It is the event where many of the current Norse gods perish and the world is flooded by the ocean. I want you to pay close attention to the description of the image featured in this slide. It associates specifically snakes and dragons with this event. Snakes and dragons are going to play a key role as we proceed into our next section on the Asian hexagrams of the I Ching. Slide 123. Finally, we reach the inner circle, classically denoting a return to the beginning and seeding new life in the process of multiplication and projection. After the story of Norse cosmology, after the events of Ragnarok, two humans survived to repopulate the world. And much like the beginning of the story, where the gods made the first two humans from a piece of driftwood, the two survivors, Lif and Yggdrasil, are found by hiding out in a hollow piece of driftwood left over from Yggdrasil's destruction. The story even ends with the repopulation of the earth, in other words, multiplication and projection. The abstract six-step formula for the Philosopher's Stone fits snugly within the symbology of Yggdrasil. Slide 124. We can continue to solidify the connection between the Philosopher's Stone and the symbolism tied to Yggdrasil when we begin to investigate the oddly shaped runes. The very same runes that the mighty Odin sought when he hung himself upon the great world tree. In ancient times, the manner in which the runes were derived was from the combination of 9 sticks or staffs laid out in a hexagonal grid. These wooden branches somewhat literally represented the 9 branches and realms of Yggdrasil. When they were all laid out in the correct orientation, 60-degree angles, they formed a hexagram whose lines formed a cube. From this hexagram and the lines that formed it, the shape of the runes were derived. This is the reason for their oddly rigid shape. You can also see a direct reference to this pattern being referred to as the male seed of life from the flower of life section discussed earlier. Slide 125. Given several names such as the primal snowflake or mother rune. The symbol itself is a collection of 9s into 3s, placed in a hexagonal formation so that their intersecting lines form a duality of opposite facing, 60-degree angled interlocking triangles. All of this forms a hexagonal star pattern that matches the seal of Solomon. A symbol that we saw earlier was a geometric representation of the abstract formula for transmutation encoded within the Philosopher's Stone. The story of Odin hanging himself on the world tree to gain knowledge of the runes takes on a new meaning through the eyes of the Philosopher's Stone. When we acknowledge that Yggdrasil itself was an encoded representation of the abstract formula, and that the runes themselves were drawn out from a symbol identical to the seal of Solomon. The runes of Odin transform from magical inscriptions into a letter system taken from a geometric representation of the concept of transmutation and transcendence. Slide 126. We can continue to decode the symbology associated with Odin when we investigate the mysterious symbol known as the Valknut, a symbol composed of 9 lines, grouped into 3s, that form a 6-pointed hexagram, and a duality of interlocking inner and outer triangles, exactly matching the abstract description of the mother rune. Slide 127. The meaning of the Valknut, a symbol whose official meaning is theorized, becomes obvious. Through the use of the Philosopher's Stone, it is an encoded representation of the 9 branches of Yggdrasil and the mother rune. Slide 128. To further solidify the connection, one of the oldest depictions of a Valknut was seen directly underneath a horse, possibly being ridden by Odin. Slide 129. The name Yggdrasil literally translates to Odin's horse. Given all of this, it's safe to say that Norse cosmology is also part of the body of symbology connected to the Philosopher's Stone. Odin was known to have the ability to transform and shapeshift, and his crucifixion on the world tree was itself a transformative event that transmuted him to a higher level of power by imbuing him with hidden knowledge. Slide 130. The next body of symbology we will use the Philosopher's Stone cipher to decode is the I Ching, or Book of Changes, an ancient Chinese divination text that has served as the foundation for much of Chinese and Asian religious symbolism. Slide 131. Primarily used as a divination text for predicting how situations would transform. The concept being that if you can predict how a situation will change, you could potentially guide it, thus transforming change into transmutation, or a guided path to a situation that would be most beneficial to the practitioner. Theoretically speaking, the content of the I Ching, much like the rest of our body of symbology, revolves around the number 6. A practitioner would manipulate bundles of yarrow sticks to produce a set of 6 random numbers, ranging from 6 to 9. There were 64 possible sets, and each corresponded to a hexagram within the I Ching. This type of divination, involving sticks and hexagrams, matches the same process in which the Nordic runes were derived from 9 branches that form the mother rune. Both are using sticks to form hexagrams, and both form a type of symbolic language from those hexagrams. The Norse had their runes, and the I Ching has its 64 hexagrams. Both a type of symbolic language derived from a hexagonal stick pattern. Slide 132. We must also acknowledge the concept of yin and yang that is associated with the I Ching and its hexagrams. One of the things yin and yang themselves represent are the combination or unification of opposites that brings about stability, and through that a cohesion that births something in which the whole is greater than the interdependent components. A unification of opposites that leads to a transmutation. You can actually see the symbol of yin and yang represented in the numbers that the hexagrams revolve around, 6 and 9. When placed together as 69, the number bears a striking visual resemblance to the yin and yang symbol. The image before you. The image before you is a collection of all 64 hexagrams arranged in the Fuhsi, or the early heaven arrangement. This formation literally takes on the shape of the squared circle symbol. Slide 134, a square within a circle, a clear indication of its connection to the Philosopher's Stone transmutation sequence. It should also be noted that the moniker of hexagram associated with these 6 lines is itself the word they use to describe a 6-pointed star, matching both the Seal of Solomon and the Mother Rune, both of which are directly connected to the abstract transmutation sequence of the Philosopher's Stone. Slide 136. We can even further the connection between the hexagrams of the I Ching and the hexagram of Solomon with how both operate from a geometric standpoint. If you will recall from the discussion earlier on the Seal of Solomon and how it represented the unification of opposites, with its dual-facing triangles combined into one symbol. The hexagram of the I Ching are also organized into 2 opposing trigrams, or a collection of 3 lines. The upper and lower trigram that combined makes the hexagram. Slide 137. A comparable system to the Philosopher's Stone sequence can be found in the sequence of the Gyeu, or hexagrams themselves. The following diagram and accompanying explanations were taken from Taoist master Alfred Huang's translation of the I Yi. Slide 138. In the book's breakdown of the hexagrams, we can see how the lines within the hexagrams represent a yin or yang aspect. The yin and yang symbol we saw earlier was a literal symbolic representation for the unification of opposites. We also see the sequence of the Gyeu explained by Confucius himself, describing a sequence of events that each line represents, with the 6th line being its ending. Slide 139. The interpretation that the 6 lines represent a sequence of unfolding events is rooted in the sequential structure of the hexagrams themselves. The lines represent successive stages in the development of a given situation. Slide 140. This developmental model is taken from the I Ching itself, illustrated in the very first hexagram within that book known as the creative or Qian. There it is metaphorically explained as a dragon's transition or ascension, from hidden on the ground to openly flying in the air, a type of transcendence or transmutation. Essentially, the hexagrams are an exact match for the abstract sequence of the Philosopher's Stone. We have a 6-step sequence represented by 6 lines that themselves are composed of the yin and yang symbol, or unification of opposites. It also matches the conceptual meaning for the Seal of Solomon, where outside of the alchemical interpretation, we see that that symbol is also composed of 6 lines, which themselves are held to be the unification of opposites. Not only that, but the sequence of the Geyu or hexagrams are set up in a way where the end of one hexagram leads to the beginning of another in the sequence, meaning that the 6th line of one hexagram leads to the beginning of another, exactly how the Philosopher's Stone sequence ends with a return to the beginning, with the inner circle. Slide 141. Another interesting place these two bodies of symbology cross over is within the number 56. In the hexagrams of the I Ching, these represent the unpure hexagrams and are separated from what they call the pure 8, mirroring this in the esoteric tradition of tarot cards, a divination system directly linked to alchemy and the geometric symbols from sacred geometry. The cards are divided into an upper and lower arcana, much the same way the hexagrams are divided into pure and unpure. Slide 142. Both systems use the number 56 for their situational or elemental building blocks. Both reach the number 56 after subtracting the pure or major sets, and both take their readings from a mixture of fundamental sets such as the yin and yang lines and the 4 suits. The numerology differs slightly, but the core function remains strikingly similar. They are localizations of the same system. Slide 143. There has even been notable research comparing the specifics of the hexagrams and arcana of the tarot to see if there are correspondence between their meaning. Unsurprisingly, they have quite a few similarities. Some of that may be due to cultural diffusion. As no human civilization truly developed in isolation, however, it does demonstrate an important link between seemingly unrelated symbology. Slide 144. The Buddhists, Taoists, and Hindus who studied the I Chings and its hexagrams were not unfamiliar with the symbology connected to the Philosopher's Stone. Before you is the tantric mandala Vajrayogini, named after the central figure within it. Slide 145. Vajrayogini, who is held to be the essence of all Buddhas, individuals who had transmuted into an enlightened state. As a transformative deity, her powers are literally transmuting mundane situations into a higher spiritual path. You'll also notice her powers of rebirth and preventing death match up to the power said to be held by the physical Philosopher's Stone, as well as the aurora or vesica piscis surrounding this deity. Slide 146. We can even see other vague connections to the Philosopher's Stone's generative associations, with the 6 yogas mentioned here, and the recommendation of this mandala for those suffering the current degenerative age. Slide 147. In the description of Vajrayogini, we can also see a perfect explanation of how these so-called deities and supernatural gods are actually symbolic personifications. Here we see how each visual aspect and detail of the god is actually a symbolic visual representation of something. This perspective was not an isolated use of symbology. All of the gods in ancient mythology were typically constructed in the same manner when it came to their visualizations. Much the same way we saw the creatures surrounding Yggdrasil were actually symbolic endosings of the abstract steps of transmutation. The gods themselves are personified concepts, alchemical shorthand, not supernatural beings meant to be worshipped. That is superstition.